And we're live, everybody. Good morning. It is Friday. Wow, December 3rd. Hopefully you've already started your Christmas shopping. It's on the way, guys. Tick, tick, tick. My name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group, Food Safety Foundation. And of course, if you're here, this is the Food Safety Chat Live. And we do this every Friday, and we go live on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And we talk about all things food safety. And I have the privilege of bringing on guests here on the show with me to talk about topics around food safety. And today I have my good friend, Austin Welch. She's with me today. Austin, good morning.
Good morning. How's it going, man?
Going well. So everybody, what's really cool and unique about this, if you're new to this, first off, welcome. And this is not a presentation. This is not us lecturing you on a particular topic. This is us sharing information and things that we've learned and stuff that we find that's really cool that can help you in your career. And the advantage of this is it's interactive. You get to ask us questions. We'll respond to those questions and kind of weave them into the conversation here over the next 45 minutes. And it's always amazing to me because every single time we do this, time goes like this. And before we got on the air here, Austin and I were having a bit of a philosophical conversation about life and collecting stuff and what happens when you're gone and all these type of things. And we're, it's like we kind of ended just before we went on the air here of, it's like, well, and then, we're all dead. It's like, oh, geez, this is going to make for a tough food safety chat here. But we're all here. We're all grateful to be here. We're going to have an awesome chat.
We're all alive.
Yep. And we're here in Colorado. Austin's in Colorado as well. And the weather here has been absolutely gorgeous and amazing. I think yesterday was a record high, 73, 74, something crazy?
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah. And weekend is supposed to be looking nice as well. You look out the window, beautiful skies. It's a good time to be in Colorado, that's for sure. Unless you own a ski resort, and they're not too happy. But that's okay. So, Catherine, good to see you this morning. Duncan, good morning to you. Renee, my assistant, is here. So thank you for joining us, Renee. Tim, nice to see you again. Hopefully the weather in Minneapolis is nice. Tammy, nice to see your happy face again this morning. Austin. Yasmin, nice to see you from Toronto. Martin, always good to see Martin here as well. We always have such an amazing group of people who join us on this. So thank you, because we do this for you. And we're really happy when we have this interaction. So glad to have us. Now, one of the things, Austin, that I always forget, and I just about did it here right now, is one of the rituals we have here in the morning is we like to everybody have a drink of your favorite beverage together with us. So I have coffee. Looks like Austin's got his as well. So please join us. Wonderful. Good morning, David from DC.
Hey, David.
Good place to be there as well, David, in DC. DC is a nice place. I always like going there, except for in the middle of the summer. Super hot. Lance is in Northern Cal, always a nice place. I worked in the dairy industry for a long time, so I spent my fair share in Northern California, out in the valley, that is for sure. So one of the things before we get started here as well, I wanted to acknowledge my sponsor. Let's see if I can do this right here today. Hey, look at that, I did it. Okay, up here in the corner, we've got EAS Consulting Group is a group of consultants who are working out of the DC area. Everybody is independent contractors like myself. I work with EAS, and they have in the food space over 100 consultants in their stable of talent that they can call upon. So odds are if you have something that you're working on and you're trying to kind of take your programs and systems to that next level, get ready for SQF version 9 or whatever it is you're doing, they're going to have somebody who can help you with that. On average, Austin, they have over 20 years of experience across the entire board for everybody working for EAS, which is absolutely amazing. And as part of the sponsorship with EAS, one of the things that they graciously allow is a discount for those training programs that they have. So you can go and peruse their training programs, get 15% off using code word Bryan when you check out. So that's Bryan with a Y, B-R-Y-A-N. I don't think it's case sensitive, so you should be okay there. But you get 15% off that training, so you can do in-person trainings, come in and do some customized training for your teams. You can also do some of the trainings that they have online, which is great during this COVID time. And of course, that segues really nicely into our topic today, which is training. So that's a good segue there. Good morning, Pedro. Nice to see you here as well. Now, we've had Austin on before, and the response we had from what we talked about relative to training was absolutely amazing. So we're really happy to have Austin back here. I think what Sage Media and his company is doing is absolutely cutting edge. So for people who are new to the show, Austin, let's kind of give everybody an idea of what it is that your company does and what you do.
Certainly. Thanks, man. I created Sage Media with my business partner, Richard Fleming, about 7 or 8 years ago now. And the catalyst for it was that we both came from a background in working in production and happened to stumble our way into the leadership development world and saw the training films that people had, and were really kind of appalled at the lack of storytelling, the lack of emotional engagement, the lack of cinematography, and decided that this was an industry that we really wanted to get into. And the best way that I sum up what Sage Media does, because we are both filmmakers, learning designers, and researchers. So we kind of created this Venn diagram, and in the middle is that Sage Media, and it's a combination of learning design in one circle, storytelling and filmmaking in another, and then cognitive science in the third. So we're leveraging a lot of research from cognitive science, which is everything from motivational theory to neuroscience to psychology, sociology, down to what we were talking about earlier, philosophy. Finding meaning in life and how that applies to our work and how do we translate that into learning. So the goal is really to transcend learning from just like knowledge transfer to, how does this actually tie into the mission and the values and the ethics and, the deeper meaning to what it is that we do in the food industry.
Yeah. And that's why this is so fascinating, right? So training is super, super important. And we're seeing lots of content and lots of people out there talking about food safety culture. What does that mean? How do you measure it? What do auditors do when they come in? And a lot of times you hear comments back along the lines of it's like art appreciation. I don't know what good art is, but I know what I like. And a lot of times with auditors, that's kind of the way it is too. They'll have little things they'll look at in plants around food safety culture. So for example, if during the opening meeting, the only people who show up for the opening meeting is the quality manager and the auditor and nobody else is available, right? That sends a strong message. If during the closing meeting, it's a repeat of that, right? It's the quality manager and the auditor, and the plant manager comes in for a few minutes and the first thing out of his mouth is, what's my score? Right? That's a bad sign too, right? Mm-hmm. And when I was on the SQF Technical Advisory Council, this is a subject we talked about all the time, this was 2.1 under SQF management commitment and these type of things was one of the least written up things because it's very hard to quantify. And put yourself in the shoes of the auditor. I mean, you're sitting in a meeting with this plant and you've just gone through and done this audit and looked at all their systems and checked all these things. And then during the closeout meeting, you write them up for lack of management commitment and a insufficient food safety culture. It's not going to sit too well, right? Because they're going to push back because nobody likes to be told you suck. And essentially that's what you're doing. And that puts the auditors in a very awkward spot because it's hard to defend. And we're all running around, Austin, trying to figure out what food safety culture means. And this kind of goes back to me for that artwork analogy. We can do what we did in the past, which I've done plenty of, and it's terrible. Right? There's a PowerPoint that's created on a subject. And normally it's, the team at corporate or whatever, they'll put together a PowerPoint presentation on, GMPs. And it'll be a deck of 20 or 30 slides, and it's got all kinds of words on the pages and quotes from the CFR and pictures of things you shouldn't be doing, et cetera, et cetera. And then that goes out to the organization. And the command comes down to the plants that, hey, you guys need to train everybody in your plant every year on this, right? And what happens then is it generally gets thrown on the quality manager's shoulders. And they're like, oh, right? And so they're like, all right, fine, we need to get through the training. And they get everybody in a training room, and the quality manager stands up the front, and she's like, hey, guys, we got to do our GMP training. And either consciously or subconsciously, she's putting the message forward that, all right, let's just get through this. All right, you don't want to be here. I don't want to be here, man. And it normally happens at the end of a shift, right? So let's say that overnight you have sanitation. And that sanitation crew has been cleaning all night, and they're wet and they're tired and they're dirty. And now you put them in a conference room and they're sitting in the back of the classroom, Austin. They're all like this, right? They're barely conscious and they're looking at their phones and they're like, oh, whatever, right? And so the quality manager reads through the slides, clicks through them, tries maybe to get some engagement with people and ask them questions. And at the end, everybody gets a written quiz and everybody goes, oh, thank God. And they all go their own way. The follow-up on that is that there's always people that miss, right? And there's people on vacation, and now the quality manager's got to track them down and do training for them. And everybody walks away going, oh my God. Right? One thing I think we can all agree on, Austin, is that's not how to do it, right? If you want to build a food safety culture, training is critical, absolutely critical. And you have to be able to convey this information. And I think what's going on right now is everybody understands with this particular topic around food safety culture that we need to do something, but the story I just told is the only tool we have, right? And it's not going to work. So it gets down to that learning design piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so let's kind of dive into that topic around that is, so how is learning designed? What is it that you found in your business?
Yeah, well, and I think what the first thing you were talking about there is developing a culture of learning. Mm-hmm. And so, when we talk about, food safety culture, I think the culture of learning is really important. And I'm about to actually publish an article on this around kind of how to assess your existing, culture of learning around mm-hmm. food safety culture. How does this integrate into your overall strategy? But I think a lot of times what you're talking about is that the training or the education programs are rolled out it's a twofold. It's either we got to meet compliance, right? We got to check this box, or there's a knee-jerk reaction to something happened and that isn't correct. And obviously we need to do training again because our people don't understand how to do something properly. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing the biggest opportunity that I see a lot of people miss is just taking a beat and asking themselves the larger question of why are we doing this in the first place? Mm-hmm. Begin with the end in mind. And so as a learning designer, whenever, I come in to work with a client, consult with them, they usually will say, well, we want to develop a food safety culture program. And that's kind of where the conversation just kind of stops and they're like, and what do you think? And it's like, okay, well, let's uncover what that means to you. And to do that, and when I put on that learning designer hat, there's 4 main things that I'm looking at. And the first one I'm looking at is what is the actual result that you want as a company? Why are we doing this in the first place? What is the return on investment? What is the KPI? Right? Because like you said, rolling out the GMP training without specific KPIs, it's just nebulous training that just floats around in my head. So actually naming the specifics of what you want to see happen makes it easier to move on to that next step, which is what behavior is necessary to drive that KPI. So once again, if we're looking at things, hand washing, right? We know that we want to lower recalls due to, potential issues that were attributed to hand washing. That's the KPI might be lower, by X amount. The behavior that we're looking at is, well, we need people to wash their hands. Well, the question then is why aren't they? So it's doing that analysis of why is this behavior not happening? And a lot of times it might be, it's not knowledge-based, it's environmental, right? The hand washing, there's not enough hand washing stations. They're in odd places where it's hard to get to in time. It's not, it's they're out of sight, out of mind. And so that's where, as consultants, we also look at, what are the other potential risk factors that are preventing this behavior? But if it is a behavioral thing, then we go, okay, well, what knowledge is lacking? So we're kind of moving in this specific order, right? We're saying, what do we want to see happen? what behavior is necessary to make that happen, then what knowledge is necessary to drive that behavior. So, okay, well, they don't maybe they don't know what 20 seconds looks like, what 30 seconds looks like in the real world, or the proper hand washing procedure. They're missing parts of the hand or something like that. So then we design the knowledge aspect of it. Here's what they need to know. And then the final aspect, which is usually where most people start, is then we say, well, how do we create a training environment that will foster the facilitation of that knowledge? And that's things like you were talking about, making sure that the company is placing a certain level of importance on the training, right? Do they have a clean room to do this in? Is it comfortable? Is it planned at the appropriate time, or is it just being shoehorned in, sending the message that, this is just something we got to get off our plate to, satisfy legal, and we then move on with our lives. So setting that tone is really important. And then those are the four main aspects that I look at within learning design, which is what's the final result I want, what's the behavior that I'm looking for, what's the knowledge that I want to bestow upon somebody, the new information, and then what's the training environment look like? How am I going to do that? And for me personally, in Sage Media, most of our training environment focuses on storytelling and narrative films, where we create these stories to connect emotionally so that people will pay attention. We want to drive curiosity and engagement so that they will actively engage in the learning. We tap into some motivation and then hopefully drive that behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point, because the storytelling piece of it is so important. Because when we're at home, and we were talking about some shows on Netflix and Hulu before we went live here as well. We come home after a hard day at work and we choose with our free time to watch stories. Mm-hmm. We get involved, right? My wife and I are watching Vikings on Hulu, and you have these characters and you follow them, and they have trials and tribulations, and they triumph. For in the case of the Vikings, right, everybody dies, right? Everybody back then dies, they drop like flies. And if you're like make to 30, you're like, yes. And you engage in stories, right? I'm not watching a book on Vikings of, Vikings were in the 800s in the Scandinavian countries, and they went on raiding and pillaging missions. Okay, yeah. Is there a quiz at the end here or what? No, you're involved in the story, right? And that storytelling element is so important, right? It gets back to those elements, GMPs, right? So that's a perfect example of what we were talking about here. What result do we want, right? We want, and let's say that we have a product where the people are moving products and touching things and stuff like this. We want to make sure that we're reducing our micro load. Maybe that's a good thing to measure in that product, right? So we were at this benchmark level for micro in QC testing for product. Let's bring that down by 50%. Okay, now what behavior are we going to change? Well, let's take a look at the hand washing. We assume, I think Austin, you made a good point on that. We assume that the hand washing station itself is great, right? Okay, well, let's go watch, because shifts arrive in groups. And if you've got 20 people backed up waiting for the hand wash station, some people are going to be like, I got to clock in. I don't have time for this, right? And they're going to bypass it. Something we found out in the dairy industry a number of years ago is there's a particular design of a hand washing station. It's one of these circular ones where everybody can kind of stand around it. Good in theory, right? Because you can get lots of people washing their hands, but we found that the mechanism inside would get dirty. And if you didn't take it apart and clean it periodically, that hand washing station was spreading germs. It wasn't fixing them. And so you need to look at your hand wash station, right? Is this providing the function? I mean, and there's new tools that are out there, right, with things you can stick your hands in and they, time it and stuff like that. Awesome. But if you've got people backed up and they bypass it, what's the point? You also have to remember that people who are doing the GMP training aren't microbiologists, right? A lot of times in plants, people will say, oh no, I wear gloves, my hands are good. They just assume that the gloves are sterile. And you have to understand that and teach it in those terms. And the environment, oh my God, the environment. Normally, the training room in plants is the dungeon, right? It's somewhere off to the side. It's full of folding metal chairs. They get together there for birthdays every now and then. And it's just a dank, dingy, awful space, right? Who wants to learn in that?
Well, and talking about the storytelling thing, the people choose, they go home and they'll binge, Netflix shows and Hulu shows and things like that. And the thing is that you're still learning in that. I mean, storytelling at its core is a educational thing. You learn something at the end of anything that you are watching. That's when we talk about the moral of the story, is that if you don't have a story with a strong moral, then it's boring and you're not learning anything. And so one of the, analogies I use a lot is that, when I was watching Mad Men, I was fascinated with the show, and I was like, I was learning something. So there's not a curriculum attached to it, but I could easily create a curriculum based on each episode of Mad Men, where it's like, okay, well, in this episode, we learned about how to acquire new clients. We learned about sexual harassment and alcoholism, but each one of those things, I mean, I could literally create a curriculum for, a sobriety course on like, here are the key signs of alcoholic behavior, right? And here's what we can see. But because you are consuming that information in a story world, there's something magical that happens where you synthesize that information into your own world. And what we see a lot within training is that it's so on the nose, right? It's so didactic that it becomes so sterile that I can't apply it to my own reality. But if we make it a little bit more complicated, and I don't mean like overly complicated, but in a story, whenever you're watching a movie, you're usually thinking, what's going to happen next? I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have the answer, but I want to know what that answer will be. Therefore, I will keep watching. That's the kind of complexity that we want to include into training, because that curiosity drives that intrinsic motivation. I want to know what this is, as opposed to I'm being forced to learn this.
God, that is so smart. Because for example, with the Vikings show, I now know that Ragnar Lothbrok was a Viking raider and a king in Norway. And you go and I looked all this stuff up online. He was a real historical figure. Now, of course, it's a story, right? And they're taking liberty with it. They don't know everything about him. But I know his name was Ragnar, and he had a wife, Lagatha, and he had 5 kids, Uba, Hitzberg, and I know all this crap, right? I'm learning history from the Vikings that I didn't know before I watched this show. And it wasn't set up as a PowerPoint. It was a story, and it's an engaging story.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately we didn't get this contract, but, we pitched an idea for a sales training to a large, sales organization. They wanted to, create this customer-centric sales journey. And it was really about, specifically like manufacturing sales. And we said, look, the best way to convey this, I think, would be we should create kind of a story that mimics SpaceX and like, a story about someone trying to go to the Mars, and but also all of the interactions and the moving parts that are necessary to make that happen. Because that's where we get. So now we have a common mission that we can look at. This wasn't for a SpaceX company; they were a sales company. But it was like, but how do we create a story that is analogous enough where the learner needs to make that connection themselves? Because what we see too often is that learning is designed in this way where it's like, we want to make sure that they get 100% each time. We just need to get this checked off. And it's like, but you're not learning anything. You have to, struggle is inherent in learning. As you create those new neural connections, it's hard. That's what learning looks like. So we want to make sure that we're actually engaging them in something that requires a little bit of that struggle. And that's where that storytelling comes in, because you're kind of, putting sugar in the medicine, where it's like, okay, I'll engage in this because I'm curious to find out where this goes.
Well, that goes back to good storytelling, right? The hero's journey. The hero has to go through some type of change and struggle and come out better at the end. And
exactly.
We care about that. David had a question here for us. Is there an equivalent of food safety culture in other industries that has been successful? Good question.
So I'm not sure I totally understand the question, David, but I'm going to, if you want to elaborate while I try to fumble my way through this, please do so. Equivalent of food safety culture in other industries. So I'm thinking of like, I think of safety culture in is the first place I go to. So I think, and Bryan, you and I were talking about this just yesterday. Alcoa Aluminum was a company. There was a gentleman named Paul O'Neill who came into Alcoa, I think it was back in the 80s. And Alcoa was a huge steel or aluminum manufacturing company. Profits were down. They actually had a really good safety record, but they still had injuries. They still had fatalities. It's a dangerous industry. And this gentleman, Paul O'Neill, came into Alcoa as the CEO to hopefully, get the profits back up because they were struggling financially. And at the first shareholder meeting, he said, essentially, if you want to see how Alcoa is doing financially, you need to look at our safety record. And this man took this very seriously and drove that culture where it was like, if there's an incident in any of our factories around the world, here's my cell phone. I want the plant manager or whoever is in charge to call me directly and let me know what happened. We're going to investigate it. We're going to find out what's going on. They were driving for, I think the concept was, they called it like better than zero or below zero. So basically they were like, we want people to go home better at the end of the day than when they came in. So that's, that we don't want to just like not have incidents. We want people to be refreshed and regenerized, and feel good about the work that they're doing when they go home. And as a result, over a 10, 15 year process, not only did they get the best safety rating or, best safety scores in the industry, I mean, profits went up like 400%. Like he pulled that company out of the hole because they had a common mission to stand behind now. When we talk about the moral of the story resoundingly was, we are a safe place to work, which meant recruitment was easier, retaining people was easier, the less safety issues, less money spent. So hopefully, David, that might answer what you were asking. I'm actually looking at the comments now.
No, I think that's good, right? Because one of the things that they do well in safety is the concept of near misses. Right? So a forklift goes around a corner too fast and almost hits somebody. Woo, shoot, right? Everybody kind of goes like this, but they actually investigate that because on the safety side of things, near misses lead to accidents, right? So if we can prevent the near misses, we're going to prevent the accidents. So that's good thinking on that side.
Yeah, and Jill has a great comment here about the car industry in Japan utilizing the Kaizen methodology, and that's a critical element to our consulting practice is going through what's also been called the 5 whys. So asking why a particular issue is you're faced with is occurring, and continue asking why. So going back to the hand washing issue, people aren't washing their hands. Well, why aren't they washing their hands? Well, they don't have time to wash their hands. Well, why don't they have time to wash their hands? Well, it's because we don't have we don't have enough sinks. Well, why don't you have enough sinks? Well, the plant wasn't designed that way. Well, why? And you keep going to find the root cause, and it's like, okay, well, now we can fix that, as opposed to just making these assumptions as to what the problem might be.
Yeah, as opposed to going down the floor and yelling at everybody and saying, "Hey, wash your hands," right? And then right. Going back to your office and think you've done your job when you really haven't. And I think really this kind of gets into, and really we've been talking about our second topic here for the conversation, which is, why do people learn? What motivates people to learn, right? It's not, and we were talking about this, right? It's not how do people learn at this point. It's like, why? Why do people choose to learn?
Yeah, and that gets into, whenever I was explaining at the beginning what Sage Media does, this gets into the cognitive science circle of that Venn diagram. And so much of what we're looking at is gathering research from academia and then trying to synthesize that into, executable strategies back for the industry. And this was a topic that started with me years ago when I was looking into anti-harassment training. And I was like, well, why is it so hated? Nobody likes it. Why is it so bad? And also, why is it so ineffective? Statistically speaking, when you look at EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the governmental entity that tracks and maintains sexual harassment filings, you look year over year, and it's round about 12,000 filings each year, give or take 2% up or down. But it is the definition of status quo, even though for 30 years we have, as a country, been doing anti-harassment training. So that was the big question was, well, we're doing the training, but it's not actually doing anything. It's not working. Well, why is that? And so, I started looking into research. There's a gentleman named Frank Dobbin from Harvard, and he does a lot of research around diversity and inclusion training. And one of the big things he found was, as soon as you start talking about the law, you start to lose people. Because now we're talking about an extrinsic motivator. We're talking about here's the punishment that will happen if you don't behave accordingly, in which we can get into our existing prison system and laws around, we look at the war on drugs and how effective that was and things like that. So there's a lot of social science that shows that utilizing these extrinsic motivators, which is either a punishment or a reward to drive a behavior, usually does not lead to a lasting change. But if we tap into intrinsic motivation, which is my internal drive to do something because I enjoy doing it just for the sheer fun of it, or because it interests me, because I'm curious about it. Well, that is what, drives people to want to learn. So the question that I'm constantly looking at is, well, how do I create the environment, the learning environment where someone feels compelled to learn, not where I'm forcing them to, but they're like, yeah, this is something I want to engage in. And so some great research from a field of motivational theory called self-determination theory. And this is probably the most cited and widely accepted theory on motivation in the world. And what they found, what drives that intrinsic motivation is 3 key elements. It's a sense of autonomy, it's a sense of mastery or competence, and it's a sense of relatedness. So people are more likely to want to engage in the training if they feel that they are autonomous in some way, right? That I have choice, I have volition. If they have a chance to practice the training, practice mastery, practice their competence, prove that they know what they're doing, because all of us want to feel that we're great at what we do, regardless of what we do. And then the third one is trying to create a sense of relatedness. And when we talk about relatedness, it's like relatedness to my team, relatedness to my manager, relatedness to the company mission, right? That I understand I'm not just making, a flavor additive. We're creating a safe food for people to consume. So looking at it from a larger holistic viewpoint.
An example of that we were talking about before was we used to have a quality questionnaire we would insert in products, and we would get back verbatims from our customers. And normally when you hear back from your customers and your consumers in the marketplace, it's complaints, right? I bought this and I don't like it, right? Well, this was an amazing opportunity to tell people to tell us what they loved about our products. And they did it like crazy. And people would write in and say, oh, I love your product and I eat it during the holidays and I feed it to my grandchildren and it's part of our family tradition and these type of things. And we would get the results back from these surveys once a month. And I would post them on a bulletin board outside of the employee locker room, and people would line up to read those. And if I didn't post those on time, oh boy, did I hear it. People would be in my office saying, Bryan, where's the customer feedback? Where's our, we want to see. And it created that teamwork, right? Because people could see the outcome of their work and what they were doing mattered, and they were making people happy. And it was amazing to see that.
And that's awesome, and I love that. And but here's the tricky part, right? Is that all of this stuff, there's no panacea for any of these things, because customer reviews can also be a double-edged sword. So my wife is a physician, and once a month she gets an email from, HR, whoever, and it's a collection of all of those physician reviews throughout the month. And she has such anxiety over that because so much extrinsic importance has been placed on, you must get 5 stars each time. Yeah. Well, she works with patients with dementia and they're, psychosis. And so it can be, the most random thing will give her a low score. And that's such a huge blow. Yeah. So finding that balance as well, because I love what you're talking about, because people look forward to that.
It's not a negative. It's a positive. It's kind of like what Duncan is talking about here, right? With training, with sexual harassment training, right? It's a negative, right? You will, right? You bad people, you need to do these things and shape up. It's like, God, you're just assuming I'm guilty.
Right.
And yeah, that's not the right way to approach it for sure.
Yeah, the big shift that we, on the sexual harassment topic, the big shift that we found was instead of looking at it from this legalese element and this accusatory point of view, because what we found was that the most egregious offenders, which is usually men within power or management position, went into these trainings with a feeling that they were already guilty of something. Yeah. And we were like, and that's not a position that will be receptive to anything. So how do I, going back to the environment, how do I right out of the canon create an environment that feels welcoming and not accusatory? So we shifted the conversation to bystander intervention. So instead of just talking about the legal aspects of Title IX and repercussions, we said, well, how do we create that sense of relatedness, right, within the team? Because the vast majority of people are not harassers. They are the minority.
Yeah.
So we're saying, okay, well, we know that 98% of our team are going to be the good guys. So how do you speak up when you witness something that's inappropriate? Now you're an ally. Now you have that connectedness back to your team. You have the autonomy to, create your own intervention strategy, and so we wanted to shift that, because egregious sexual harassment offenders, there's no training in the world that's going to fix that. They just need to go.
We're seeing this play out in real time with the former governor of New York, right? So from what I've seen from his testimony so far, and I haven't seen a whole lot, is what I'm picking up from that, Austin, is that he doesn't really think he did anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, well, no, these are women that work, and I asked him out. What? And yeah, he doesn't see the problem, right? So there's a huge disconnect there. So really, and I definitely want to jump into our main topic here, which is the challenge that people are seeing right now is, what do you want to get, right? And our topic today was food safety culture, right? We're all seeing out there that we want food safety culture, right? We want a safe workplace. We don't want to be sexually harassed, these type of things, right? Mm-hmm. And the big thing that's on everybody's mind is, okay, everybody's talking about food safety culture. Everybody's writing it into their quality standards. Everybody's writing it into, all kinds of different, FDA's talking about it. It's out there big time. And people are going, okay, great. How do we do this? And I think, Austin, there's a big fear. And I think this big fear is relative to who does it, right? Because if I'm a quality manager and I'm working in a plant and I'm reading through the requirements for management commitment and food safety culture, and I'm going, oh, geez, I got to do something about this. The fear is that it becomes yours, right? So now all of a sudden you're the poor quality manager in the plant, and you say, like, hey guys, we need to build a food safety culture, and everybody goes, great. Well, go ahead and let us know how that goes. And the guy's like, the quality manager is going, I don't, I have my job. I don't have time to do this, right? This is not fair. And so part of that then is there's a hesitancy, even though we know that's the right thing to do, there's a hesitancy to take it on because it's too big of a burden for one person.
It is too big of a burden for one person. And I think that's where so much of the, best practices around that is to create a coalition, to create a team of people. Because first of all, the work that I've been doing with, some of the companies I've worked with around developing food safety culture education programs is around how do we ensure that everybody understands what this is and specifically understands their role. And I can't tell you what your role is, right? If I'm in quality, more than likely I don't understand totally what happens in mergers and acquisitions or in finance or in HR or sales. So creating that coalition that brings all of those different silos together, right? And start to de-silo the organization and have a representative from each of those departments and say, okay, well, what are potential risks that you personally could prevent for foods, when it comes to food safety? Yeah. We see very often sales needs a new product. And so it's like, so the carrot leading the horse is we need a new product ASAP that we can get out to market. so that I can meet my sales figures. And then that is now driving R&D. And so now decisions are being made based off of that specific goal, that result, right? So going back to the element of what do we want to see happen in the organization, if we're all rallied around safe food first and foremost, that is, and then developing KPIs around how we're going to make that happen. Well, now we can start to say, okay, well, we have this coalition of people, and each one of them is responsible for, being a representative of their department and the role that they play within food safety culture.
Right. No, you're making my head hurt, Austin, because you're bringing back very painful memories for me. Because exactly what you're saying is true, right? So I ran quality at big companies, and the sales force would go out and meet with retailers, and retailers have certain points in the year where they reset their shelves, and that's when new products get introduced. That's the deadline. And the sales guys will go into the retailer and say, okay, hey, we want some more business with you. And the retailer says, okay, fine. We want 5 new SKUs of gluten-free, whatever. And you need to have that on our shelves in 3 months. And the sales guys, of course, they're sales guys, right? They're going to say, you got it. We can do that for you. And then they go back to the organization and push that through. And corners are cut and things are missed and risk increases dramatically. And it's hidden, right? Nobody sees it. And from the senior executive level, they think that things are running smoothly, because part of the viewpoint at that level is, okay, if things are working, it's all good. I got other stuff to worry about, right? And if I push the organization and we make that happen, that becomes the new standard. And things can degrade, and to the point then where a catastrophic food safety event happens. So to reiterate the point then of if you're a lone wolf who's trying to do this, you're going to fail, right? So if I'm in quality and I go to the procurement team and I say, hey, you procurement people, you need to worry about food safety and you need to think about these things, and I walk away, they're going to go, who the hell is he? Who does he think he is? He's not my boss. He doesn't tell me how to do my job. That's my boss over there. He tells me what to do. And my job is to buy stuff as cheaply and efficiently as possible. And that's what I get my raise and my bonus on. He can worry about food safety himself, right? Yep. You're going to fail. You are going to fail. It has to come from the top. And so the example we were talking about, which I think is a really good one, is recalls. So food safety culture, right? We don't want recalls. And every year, the number of recalls keeps going up. And everybody's going, oh my God, why are recalls going up? And I think, Austin, a lot of it comes down to there's just an assumption in an organization that things are going to continue with the way they continue, and they're not proactively working to go to 0 recalls. And then something happens, and everybody's like, oh my God, why did that happen, right? And there's all these little pieces in there that make that happen. So you need that senior leadership level. And the example we were talking about is the CEO comes out, just like the example with Alcoa you were talking about. Okay, organization, here's our goal for this year. We will have 0 food safety recalls in 2022. 0, none, intolerable. If something is going on food safety related, I want you to call me. I want to know about it. And then he pushes that out. That senior executive pushes it out to their team, and the CEO, she goes around and says, okay, heads of procurement, operations, quality, R&D, legal, everybody, food safety is now in your goals. And we will have 0 recalls in 2022, and you will be judged against that, right? You now have an objective around that, and that gets pushed down through the organization. And now everybody can look at that and say, oh gosh, okay, well, as a team, how do we address that? Okay, sales guys, you need to be considering when you're going out food safety, right? You just can't arbitrarily accept things, right? You need to bring that back for discussion. R&D, when you're developing new products, you can't be introducing new allergens in the plant without really investigating that first, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can then look at that information and say, okay, how can we build that, and then buy that down within the organization? And really, I think this gets into where your company and your genius relative to this, Austin, is super important, because this now then shows us the way forward with new tools. And we can start building out a story at corporate, right? Now imagine, everybody, close your eyes and think about this. There's a training video people at corporate are watching, and it's going through a story of how not to launch new products, right? Where the sales guys go out and they make unrealistic promises, and the R&D guys cut corners, and the procurement buys from some people they really don't know very well, but they've got that one ingredient that you need for this new product. And the QA guys get the information and they give it to the plant, and they're really not sure how they're going to control it in the food safety plan. And we don't know how to clean the equipment, right? Everything cascades, and you have a recall, right? And everyone then can see there's no bad guy in this scenario. It's a series of steps and actions that take place that cascade into a failure, right? Now think of the opposite side of that, right? Where you have a system in place that's managing at the corporate side these food safety issues, and then you're able to bring this down to the plant and train appropriately for these new things. Now, when an auditor comes into a company and says, explain to me your food safety culture, everybody in all these different groups and all these different people that we're talking about in this process can talk about, we have a goal in our company of 0 recalls. We totally understand that what we do here impacts people's families, people's children, and their lives. And here's the things that we do in these different departments to meet those requirements. Here's what I do in procurement to make sure product is safe. Here's what I do in legal to make sure product is safe. Here's what I do in the plant on the production line. Mm-hmm. Now that auditor goes and wanes and says, that's food safety culture.
Exactly. And what you just talked about was almost a exact mirror of the film that we created for Hershey, which was, here's a company that is continually expanding their portfolio, and they have a great track record of having a really strong food safety culture, low recalls. And they said, well, we want to, as we expand, we know that we need to stay in front of this. And so we created this, learning film for them that did that exact thing. We created a narrative around a company that saw market opportunity and they wanted to jump on it, and they moved too quickly and launched a product. But it tied in every element you talked about. It was, sales over promising. It was procurement. There was machinery bought that was modified, but cleaning, the cleaning wasn't changed on it. Marketing, the mislabeling issues. I mean, it's just like everything that could possibly go wrong, we kind of included in that story, but it creates that opportunity. Because here's the other thing that's awesome about creating these analogous narratives is that as viewers, we like to watch the story and tell people how they're doing it wrong. Right. This is the fascination with horror films. When someone's walking into that room and you're like, don't do it. What is wrong with you? But we still watch them. It's one of the most popular film genres out there because we like to analyze other people's bad decisions and then learn from that. And so, in creating this narrative around this fictitious company, it separated out my client from being potentially, associated with this, but also it created an environment where the learner is able to watch and be like, oh God, that would never happen here. And let me tell you why, because we do this, 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 and this. Or I never thought of that before. What can I do to make sure that we don't have that issue? So yeah, it's fascinating to watch people's reactions because you see the lights going off. And there was another thing you were talking about, and we use the phrase corporate mythology. Like we're trying to create new mythology because historically we use myths and myth structure to convey complex knowledge or information of the world that is hard to grasp, right? If I don't understand where lightning comes from, then we create a myth around that. Well, it's the same thing. We're trying to create corporate mythology that explains here's why we do what we do. And how we communicate that culture. And it comes through this like common mythology that we can all share, this narrative. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do is create that narrative that everybody can kind of rally around and have that, common enemy, which is recalls.
Yeah. And one of the stats I love to pound into people's heads relative to recalls, Austin, is the average cost, just the average direct cost of a recall is $30 million. Mm-hmm. How much product do you have to make and sell to make up for that loss, right? If you're at a 10% margin, that's $300 million in product to make up for that failure if your company survives, right?
Right.
And part of what we're talking about here too, people may be thinking, okay, this is all well and good for big companies, but we're kind of a little guy. What about us? Well, everything we're talking about here, all these different handoffs and all these different functions, every company needs these. And the time to build them is when you're smaller, right? Because as you get larger, these things get entrenched on how you do things. and mergers and acquisitions happen and new people come on board and you have to teach them how you do things. And the bigger you get, the harder that gets to change.
So, there's a saying, you either you create the culture or the culture will create you.
Yeah. Yeah. You're going to have a culture, whether you like it or not. You better choose it.
Definitely. Yeah. And starting earlier is definitely key because, coming in and trying to change course on a multi-billion-dollar ship, that's a massive task,
right?
As opposed to just starting with the simple thing of we're about zero recalls and then building on that.
Yeah, and it's a nice, simple message that everybody can understand. And you had mentioned one of these areas where you can apply these type of things earlier that I think is worth reemphasizing, which is mergers and acquisitions, right? So at the senior executive level within companies, a lot of times the senior leadership, so the CEO, for example, doesn't come from operations. They come from finance or marketing or sales or something like this, or they come completely from a different industry. So they have that skill set and they worked in automotive and now all of a sudden they're running a food company. Right? They have no idea, right? So they have to be taught these things as well. And when you're looking at mergers and acquisitions, a lot of time these things aren't looked at. You will look at what they understand. They will set up, if you're looking at buying a company, they will set up a special room with the financial information and all this type of stuff so that the company who's interested in buying the other company can go in and look at this stuff. And it's almost always just financial things. Mm-hmm. Who's looking at the food safety things? Who is going to the plants and saying, okay, does this company have a good food safety culture? Do they understand how to control allergens? Do they understand design control? Do they have change management? Because those are all risks and those should be taken into consideration for the M&A process. So if based upon the numbers in the books, which are always, they always make them look pretty. Right? Mm-hmm. If you value that company at $100 million, but then your food safety evaluation and their culture, you go and look at these things and you find risk, it may take $10 million to fix those things. So you go back with a counteroffer and say, hey, listen, we still want to buy your company, but based upon what we found, we're adjusting our offer down to make up for those things so that we can fix those. So yeah, you may think it's worth 100 million, but we found it's worth closer to 90 for us, right? And then those surprises are brought to the surface. Plus, you're also teaching people how to look at those things, which is super valuable.
Right. Yeah, and I struggle to understand why they don't do that already. I'm like, if it gives you that bargaining chip to lower the price based on findings, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
And like you said, maybe it's because there's the rush. It's like we need this ingredient now, and so we're willing to overpay for it and just get things going, as opposed to nitpicking over price. I don't know. I'm not a M&A guy.
Exactly, and so some companies are better at that. David makes a point here that he's known a few heads of food safety have resigned because there was no food safety due diligence before an acquisition. Yeah, I mean, you're setting yourself up for failure. It's a bad situation to be in. So as usual, Austin, time is flying. So let's kind of bring this up because I think this has been an exceptionally important food safety chat because it's giving people ideas around how to move forward with these topics. And we all understand that we want to implement a food safety culture, but if you try and do it yourself, you're going to fail, right? This has to be an organizational activity. So there was three main buckets of things that we talked about, guys, and please jump in here, Austin, to help me summarize these, which is, how is learning designed? What is your outcome? What are you measuring, right? 0 recalls. We will have 0 food safety recalls in 2022. Man, is that easy to understand, right? People understand that goal. How do you measure these things? What is the ROI and how do you measure these things? Why? Why are people learning? Not how do people learn, but why are they learning? What type of motivations can you give to people to want them to learn in these environments? And then what do you want to get? And how do you avoid that big fear? And Helen reemphasized the point that I made earlier, which is that pain around the QA manager and being afraid that, they see what needs to be done, but they need help, right? And they're afraid if they raise their hand, it's all going to be dumped on their shoulders. And if they fail, they'll get blamed for it. So people hesitate when you have that fear. So putting together that committee and working and getting this from senior leadership, right? It has to be the senior leadership in the company that says, this is a goal for everyone, right? This is non-negotiable. If you want to be part of this organization, you have to support this. That needs to be communicated often. Is that a good summary so far?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the element of starting at the top is critical. We just rolled out a pretty large scale food safety culture kind of education program. And, we started with the CEO, and, facilitated the course with him, and then started with, all of the regional CEOs and COOs, so that everybody was on the same page and that they made specific commitments to like how they are going to improve food safety culture within their region and their department and so on and so forth. Because that's the other thing is seeing leadership, walk the walk. That there is specific commitments coming from leadership as well. I think it's critical, because then it's like people are more likely to mirror that behavior if they see that there's a full commitment.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So Joe made a good point here, right? Food safety professionals are amazing and can do this, and don't do it alone, right? And so I think this is where, and it's kind of a unique quirk of human psychology, Austin, maybe you have some comments on this as well, is that sometimes outside authority is a major help, right? If you have someone who understands this topic inside and out like yourself, who can come into an organization and say, here's the things that you need to do, and what this person has been telling you, I completely agree with. That type of external support from authority is huge, right? It helps to validate that messaging. And so that's where, consulting groups like EAS Consulting and the experts that they have in these areas, and companies like Sage Media, are super valuable, right? Because they can come in and shave years off of what you're doing, right? Because if you're trying to do all this on your own, it's very, very difficult. Get the help you need and accelerate that process, and you'll win, right?
We're actually working with a hospital group right now on doing some onboarding, because they have a very high turnover rate, and they realized that there were some cultural issues within how they were onboarding people. And this is a problem they've been working on internally for 2.5-3 years. And we came in and it was like, we can have this done in 4 months, like, because it's going to be the only thing we're focused on. Like, You're not, no more committees, no more bureaucracy. Like, we're going to get this done, because they were bleeding money. I mean, they quantified it was costing them over $120 million a year. Oof. In just losing people, before, so it's like, okay, our KPI now is retention. And if we know that we're losing people at the 90-day mark, if I can double that and keep them for 6 months, then we've just lowered that turnover cost dramatically.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, so part of this, right, and this is why you're here on the Food Safety Chat. And so with that, thank you for attending, right? You're growing your knowledge, you're getting new perspectives and new expertise, and I applaud you for doing that on a Friday morning. So thank you for being here. And hopefully today's message, from my viewpoint, this is exceptionally important information. And I always enjoy having Austin on, because, he just, every time he blows my mind with the information he has. So Martin had a comment here. Part of the responsibilities of the QA manager: promote quality and food safety, measure to improve, document, and validate, but also to be an extrovert, to be a leader, a communicator, a companion, and to lead by example. Coworkers and management will follow his or her leadership. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, so part of what I preach as well is that a lot of times in technical fields, we think that technical skills are all that matters, and that people will see that we're doing and they'll just automatically join in. No, absolutely not, right? You need to have the skill set to promote and show others the correct path, right? If you are the quality manager and everything that we're saying here makes sense to you, and you don't push that up through the organization and try and promote that within those other groups, you're going to have a really hard time, right? So hopefully everybody understands that. Always good to see Robert here, our friend Robert Prevendar. Good to see you. And Corey, of course. One other quick note here as well is earlier here, and Renee, if you can post this again, I would appreciate it. I put together a Locals group, and Locals is a free platform. You can sign up and get notifications from me on what's going on in recalls, some snarky comments from me on recalls every now and then. So for example, one of the things I always harp on is foreign material recalls. More than half of recalls now, Austin, are for non-metal items. So plastic and other stuff, right? What are you doing to bring those numbers down, right? What can you then take from what we're learning today and apply to training in those areas for foreign material, right? There's all kinds of applications for this information. So please join the locals group. It's free. There's a membership side where there's additional information and live streams and other stuff from me too, which is kind of cool. So you can get that benefit as well. And of course, the live stream is every Friday, and we do this at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern. And so for some of our friends around the world, so there was a gentleman here I saw earlier from India. So thank you for joining us, right? So middle of the night for them. We do this every Friday. And so we will be back here next Friday, December 10th, with another topic. And thank you, everybody. I mean, your involvement and commitment and comments on this make this worthwhile and make this fun for us. So thank you for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Everybody, enjoy your weekend. This was a great food safety chat. Tons of good material in here. So if you want more information from us, you have our emails on here. So I'm on here, barmentrout@foodleadershipgroup.com, and Austin at sage.media. So thanks again, everybody, and enjoy your weekend. And thank you, Austin. Always an awesome pleasure to have you on, my friend.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.